when they first have the thought, I'd like to not smoke anymore, I'd like to not drink anymore, but they continue to drink, they're not being phony. They're on their path. Their skepticism about whether they can do it, they need to experience in order to overcome the skepticism. And eventually, when they're ready, when they're truly ready, the teacher will appear in exactly the right moment to guide them along their path. And that teacher has been in every one of our lives. Another category of the spiritual dozen is this whole business about empowerment, authentic power versus inauthentic power. And in order to become a person who is personally powerful, who is authentically powerful, rather than trying to dominate and control other people, examine your own behavior toward the people in your life that you feel a need to dominate or control. These can be a spouse or your children very often, or co-workers or employees or clerks and service people, whoever you run into in your life where you have a sense that I have to dominate and control them, or I find myself getting upset with them, or I find these people to be impossible, or I feel a little bit better than they. Somehow you've arranged a hierarchy where you're on a higher step on this ladder of humanity than they are. Take some time to relate to them differently by seeing beyond their physical form to the fullness of God that is in them. This is very, very important. The fullness of God is in every single one of us, regardless of where it manifests itself in our physical form. You've got to be able to look at the people who are in your life, who may be causing you difficulty, who you may feel do not understand, who you may have trouble with, and instead of looking at them from a physical perspective and seeing the body that isn't cooperating and doing what you think it should be doing, you've got to see them not as a human doing, but as a human being. You've got to look into that soul and relate to it there. Look past their form. Look to the invisible, the divineness that allows them to be alive, and relate to that part of them just this once. Rather than ordering them around or judging them in some way, relate to them as if that spiritual perfection were what you were addressing, that is beyond the form. It's a great exercise for shifting to a spiritual consciousness, because you will no longer be coming from the need to dominate. Instead, you'll be attempting to empower them, where you previously viewed them as subservient to you. And once you begin to see past the physical body of those around you, you begin to relate to the very same individual force that flows through you and them. You'll begin to see that that invisible intelligence that's in you is in them, and that in some invisible way you're connected to this person. And now you'll begin to treat them as if they were you. And isn't that what the Golden Rule is all about? Just treating others as you would want to be treated. And you shift your consciousness just for a moment, and you begin to see this isn't a person who is trying to manipulate or control or is being bad. This is just a soul who is behaving in a certain way. And how can I empower them? I ask myself this over and over and over again with my children, with my wife, with the people that work for me, and the people that I work for, when I give my talks or when I write my books or when I produce these tapes. How can I empower somebody rather than how can I dominate and control them? The minute I relate to them the way I would like to be related to, the minute I relate to them as if they were me, as if we were both the same, with just two different physical manifestations who have the same invisible intelligence flowing through them, the moment I'm able to do that, I suddenly find myself empowering them, helping them to overcome the things that aren't working in the relationship. And it becomes transcendent, and real magic begins to reign where real tragic used to. Also in this area of personal empowerment and authentic power, make an attempt to help someone, anyone that's involved in your life, to do something themselves where you previously would have instructed them how to do it. In other words, shift from being the teacher to being the learner, being the student. Rather than giving an order, try asking this question. What would it take for you to prove that you can do this yourself? What would it take? then whatever response they have, oh, I couldn't do that, or, wow, I don't know, I've never thought about how I would do it, I'm just asking you to do it, whether this is a coworker or one of your children or a spouse or whomever. What would it take for you to prove that you can do this yourself? Then let's work together to make that happen. Just a simple offer of assistance rather than taking over or giving an order. What this does is it infuses you with authentic power instead of relying on external power. This is particularly useful if you can help empower someone with whom you are in conflict. You see, conflict arises when you have a need to control someone or to prove that you're right and to make the other person wrong. That's where the conflict arises. So when you give up the need to dominate, this is at the core of becoming a spiritual person. You replace the search for external power with authentic power. And authentic power is defined as that which is the ability to empower others to take control in their own lives. Rather than being a dominant person and having submissive people in your life, if you want to be a spiritual being, just shift your consciousness. How can I help them to solve this themselves? How can I get them to believe in themselves rather than doing it for them and controlling them? One of the qualities of being a spiritual being is this whole business of the spiritual being believes that he's connected. The non-spiritual being, the five-sensory being, believes that he's separate. Connectedness versus separateness. Those who are exclusively in the five-sensory world not only believe they're separate, they are separate, because we are separate physically. What connects us, of course, is that invisible intelligence, that thought, that soul, that divineness. In order to overcome this five-sensory versus and become a multi-sensory being, try picture yourself as a being who's connected by sort of invisible strings to everyone that you encounter. In this visualization, in this image, you move to the right, and those to whom you are connected also move to the right. You push, and they go tumbling. Now, when you encounter another person, imagine that connection. In this way, you begin to treat other people as if they're truly a part of you. You begin to see that you are connected, not in the physical domain. There's not an actual connection there. There's an invisible connection, and this invisible connection, that's both of us, and you care. Then you have a tendency, when you know that you are connecting there, to extend to love rather than to feel anger or enmity and competition. I've always loved the story of the man who was given a tour of heaven and hell. This wonderful guide was taking him through and showing him heaven and hell. And first, feed themselves. Everyone was in various stages of starvation since they couldn't bend their arms. And here was the scene. A large kettle of soup, these large spoons, and all these people unable to bend their arms and all starving. This was hell. And then he said, "Let me show you heaven." And he took him into heaven, and the man saw the same identical scene. All these stiff-armed people with the same real long handles on these large spoons, with a large kettle of simmering soup in the center of the room. But in heaven, the people were all healthy, and they were smiling, and they were obviously all well-fed. When the man inquired about this, he was told by his guide, "Oh," he said, "in heaven, the people have learned to feed each other. See, in hell, you're not extended, you're not connected to others. But in heaven, your mission, your divine purpose, is found in giving. And when you discover that what your true humanity is about is not about getting, it's about giving, then you'll know that you're connected. And when you feel that connectedness, every human being that you run into, every animal that you run into, all of life has that reverence in your consciousness. And you extend love because you know you're connected. It's what Christ meant